I'm now cold sweat. I think this is over. I'll go home, find a job somewhere else. It's okay. It was a short tenure.
Daniel Petre has been one of the most successful venture capitalists in Australia for decades. Returning hundreds of millions to investors, the former Microsoft executive is now on his third VC journey, this time with AirTree Ventures. He's a bit of a loudmouth, and he's right here. Great to see you, Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel. Fair enough. Reasonable call.
Is it possible to deconstruct your line of thought during the first 10 seconds of hearing an idea?
Look, I'm terrible. I love every idea. So
you're the worst VC.
I'm the worst VC in the universe at that level. My fast-reacting brain, my Kahneman fast-reacting brain, every idea is fantastic. It's fantastic. But then you do, when you move into, so probably not the first 10 seconds, but the first meeting, you'll deconstruct to try and get a sense of the founder, their skills, their background, their intellect, their level of inquisitiveness, how much they've thought about the actual segment, how much they've actually delved into who's got products in that segment and why and how and all that stuff, how they've thought about their actual product, how they're going to actually deliver the product, what's their team look like, how they thought about the economics of that environment. So you'll get a sense. And what you want is that they've thought about what they need to think about.
Yeah.
And there's a healthy balance between ego and passion and energy and thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
If it's only thoughtfulness, then you're not going to have the energy to push through. If it's only energy and enthusiasm and passion and not thoughtfulness, then the idea probably doesn't make sense, and probably they're not a good custodian of capital. Everyone, back solves successes, and I love listening to the Slack story, because Slack came out of 2 failed games, which is fantastic. It wasn't built from the ground up with a messaging platform to solve, No. It was, which I think is fantastic. Atlassian did not start off with the Jira product. That came out of the fact they had a computer servicing company, and they had to track jobs, track tasks, tickets. So fantastic. I think those stories provide a more realistic view of the many ways a great product or service can come to market. It's not just this narrow sense of I knew exactly what I would do when I was 4 years old, and I've been on that journey since.
What makes you emotional?
My kids, anything to do with my children. I think I lost my sister in a car accident 20 odd years ago. She was my only sibling. She was. People say this about dead people all the time, but she actually was a wonderful person. She was genuinely a wonderful human being, and a truck on the wrong side of the road killed her, damaged her baby, terrible. And so you realise how fragile life is.
But when something like that hits you, how do you look up from that hole and start over?
If there was one gift that my sister's death gave me, it was perspective on life. At the time, I was a vice president at Microsoft on the corporate campus. I was the only non-American vice president on the campus, only non-American to run a product group. There was some discussion about me being promoted to senior vice president. And I realised that was great, but it actually didn't matter. That what matters was family and relationships. And not that you become binary, you don't just go and do all of that, but you realise that to live a fulfilling life, you need to have done the right thing by those around you, whether they're friends and family and the community, as well as fulfill maybe your own ego or your own need for fulfillment in a job. And that was the gift, and that was the thing that got me through. And so I re-architected my life. We came back to Australia, ran Asia Pacific for Microsoft for a while, then got into venture. But the thing I can say is I made trade-offs to make sure I was available for my children, and I don't have any regrets now.
Because you were working on a globally high level.
Yeah.
And it is hard to do that while maintaining some kind of balance.
The thing to focus on is, it sounds simple, and I don't mean it to sound trite, but you try and focus on how to be super efficient at work. If you think about it from this perspective, which is what's the minimum amount of effort I need to put in to get the return I have to in the job, whether it's a sales figure or a product development or writing lines of code, whatever the thing is, rather than I'll just give myself over to this task.
Yeah.
So if you focus on efficiency, particularly in a work day, you realise a bunch of meetings are a waste of time, a bunch of emails you shouldn't read or you shouldn't send, a bunch of activities were worthless. So if you start to focus on this great thing, the signal, not the noise, the signal of what do I need to do in whatever my job is constructed as, to be successful. And if you do that well, you find there's time available.
Yeah. But what is signal and what is noise?
You're just trying to trim back and say, what are the things of my job that move that dial, and what are things that are peripheral and I'm doing just because I happen to be here or people want my time. It's not that hard actually.
No.
But you have to be focused and treat it with the same level of respect. Treat your family or your relationship environment with the same level of respect as work, and most often we don't. We say, well, my relationship will be there later, I'll do this. And as I've worked out, that's not the case.
During those years at Microsoft, you started there early, really early.
Yep.
But even as you grew to having billions of dollars in revenue and billions on the bank, you kept looking over the shoulder.
Yes.
For the competition. What are the benefits of being paranoid?
You could sit in a meeting with the senior management at Microsoft corporate, in a room with Bill Gates and Steve Ballmer and Pete Higgins and Jeff Rakes and Paul Moritz, and if you'd take those conversations, you'd swear we were a 10-person startup, when in fact we weren't. We were a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So it was really good that it made you think or believe that your competitor will wake up way smarter tomorrow, that Lotus will wake up so much smarter tomorrow.
You miss something.
Perfect. You miss something. And so I think that constant review of what you're doing in the light of other data in the market is really powerful, and it does stop you being complacent. So every company I've worked with, I've tried to say we need to be paranoid about how good is our product, how much our customers really love our product, how smart are our competitors, what are we missing in terms of market trends, and not be just complacent that because we're growing 100% year on year it means anything. One of the things that you learn working for Bill was if you didn't know what you were talking about at a deep level going to a meeting, you got in a lot of trouble. And so you should, because you're being paid well to know what you're talking about. So two things about that. Firstly, if you know what you're doing, you've thought it through, you'll be left alone to execute. More than likely you'll be more right than wrong if you really thought about it. And if you are wrong, you can very quickly go back to your assumption set and work out, well, what was wrong? If you haven't done the deep planning and deep thought, and you go off on trajectory A and it goes wrong, you've got no way of knowing what trajectory B should be because you haven't got an assumption set or deep data to tell you. So it serves both well in terms of making you having thought it through, but also it's like a safety net in terms of if it doesn't go according to plan, you can recover. One of the other good things about Bill was, and I've tried to use this in my companies, is have that approach, but also if it goes wrong, don't go and scream at people. When I worked for the Packers, Kerry Packer's approach was to scream at people. That was his thing, his go-to strategy, or want to sack somebody. And the reality is, if you thought about something well, you've discussed it with a team, and you've embarked on a trajectory or a strategy. If it goes wrong, what should be unpacked in a calm and careful way is what went wrong and how do we fix that. If you start attacking people, then what's going to happen? Well, they're going to hide it. They're going to hide mistakes, and that will just become a complete disaster.
What's your favourite Bill Gates story?
Well, the first one, I'll give you a couple. The first one was my introduction to the Microsoft corporate environment, where I was country manager for Australia, and I had to go over and present my first deck, which is that every 6 months you presented your deck of what had gone on and what was going to happen. And there was a conference room in Building 9, and Building 8, and I sat outside with my folders, as you did in the early 90s, and the room was behind me in a glass wall and had this sort of curtain, so you could sort of translucent see through the curtain, and there was another country manager in there, and all you could hear was just screaming. Well, not screaming, loud voices, to be fair, and you could see
Definitely
Bill
sounded like screaming at the time.
Yeah, well, I was probably hypersensitive because I hadn't met Paul Moritz, I hadn't met a bunch of people before, and they were all in the room with Bill and Steve Ballmer and Mike Maples and John Shirley and everyone, and Frank Gaudette, and so I'm there, and you could see Bill through the translucent just sort of pointing at this guy, and making some strong points, and so I'm, now cold sweat. I think this is over. I'll go home, find a job somewhere else. It's okay. It was a short tenure. And he comes out, obviously go to the bathroom and closes the door. Then about 2 seconds later, the door opens and Bill comes out with what was clearly the guy's chair and his folders, and puts them outside the door, on the other side of the door where I'm sitting. Okay, and then I'm sitting there, and then the guy comes back and the door's locked, and he can't get back in. And then a PA came around and said, "Oh, I won't mention his name. Bill's asked if you could, and guess what? He was sacked a short while later, and then I had to go in and do my presentation. But it was interesting because I went in there petrified. I thought this is all over, and what I worked out really quickly was if you knew what you were talking about, and that was probably the easiest presentation I've ever given because I knew my staff so well, and they were all really pleasant. And what had happened was this guy was just making shit up. When he came out for the Olympics. I hung out with him a bit, and it's 2000, so and he had 2 piles of books, like thick books, like these sort of books, of medicine and biology. And I said, "Well, what are you doing?" He said, "I want to learn more about biology." And he's got a photographic memory. So that happened, and I was, sort of, that's pretty cool. And then I remember we went to a social function with Bill, and he'd paid for the movement of a group, I think it was from USC or maybe UCLA, of the biotech group up to University of Washington. I met with a professor, the head of and I said, Bill's into biotech now and bioscience, and he said, yeah. I said, well, how good is he really? And this guy said, he's probably one of the 2 or 3 best read people in the world now. So I thought, okay.
How do you nurture your own intellect?
I always think my ideas are stupid, so I'm looking for ways to test them and learn. So I think that's helped me broaden it. I think the mistake that some of my cohort of people who my age who've done reasonably well, they start to think there's something special about them and they're really good, and they're probably not. They've probably just been lucky. Probably, I think I'm of average intelligence. I've been lucky. If I'd been born 40 years earlier with an interest in technology, I'd be stuffed.
But the personality trait to take an assumption and test it, though, because you still today hear stuff where people have made an assumption, had an idea, developed something, but they never actually tested it.
You need to. I think, and this is one of the problems in the startup community, is that you have to. It's super easy to do the slide deck and the vision and the MVP, but
people get really good at the talk.
You've got to actually get what customers care about it. What customers are passionate about this product, and will express. And are they smart customers in the sense that, have you found the only 10 dumb people in the world who've never heard about anything else? Or have these people, we saw that guy and we saw that guy and we saw that guy, but yours is the best and here's why. Now, you need that feedback.
You can walk down straight on the street and close your eyes, but you'll still get hit. And that's what I sometimes see.
But if you're an individual founder, you need to be seeking out critical advice. And that's where a good venture firm, not just a bunch of cheerleaders will clap and say how gorgeous you are all the time. Someone will say, well, that didn't make sense, or you could have done this better. That's really important. Now, if the founder doesn't get that from either friends or investors or someone, it's dangerous, because they do become this sort of self-perpetuating belief in themselves, and more often than not, that'll blow up.
Yeah. Thinking about the young founder out there that is embarking on his or her first journey, what would be your 30-second pep talk?
Do you really care about this idea? And are you prepared to spend the next period really delving into it and what the product will be in the market? And that might take you weeks and months, not days. And it might be very frustrating. You might end up with a 0 answer, that no, you shouldn't do it. Are you prepared for that journey? And if you can see that they are actually really engaged, and they want to find out what the right answer is, either their idea truly is fantastic or it's a non-differentiated idea, that's what I would say. Now, you can see when you talk to people like that and they start to go, oh, well, I was hoping you'd just give me $200,000 in seed funding, and and they hadn't really thought
through.
Yeah. I think, okay, well, you're not really, you're fishing for something to do. You're not actually.
Because should everyone be a founder?
No, of course not. There's this terrible idea that people should never work in large companies ever and will only go work in startups. Well, that's particularly ridiculous. If you've run growth for Salesforce in California, I'm pretty sure you'd be of use to a startup at some point in time. So I think the idea that you can only do a startup experience was wrong. And I think for some young people, many, it is good to go and learn at a great company, not a great company, and learn best in class, whether it's development or marketing or whatever it is, and then apply that.
So if you are now embarking on hiring your first team or your contract, or so, is there anything to learn in between?
There are 3 roles that have to be done well in a company, in a startup. You need someone who understands the product, the competitive situation, the product feature sets that matters, what the customer's looking for, all that sort of, the product, the way we think about product management. Someone has to be the development guy or girl who is actually going to either do the development or run the development, do the development and run the development team. Who's doing that, and who's the growth person, who's thinking about how we're going to efficiently acquire customers at the right cost of acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. Now, sometimes they can be, the product person can be the CTO, or product person could be the CRO, the revenue person. Rarely would the CTO be the CRO, that would be rare. But those 3 roles have to be done very, very well by people. So my first point is make sure you've covered how those roles will be fulfilled. And usually it's at least 2 people in a startup, maybe it's 3, and maybe 2 are founders and 1's an employee. If it's an employee, the quality of that person really matters. And how do you then solve for a quality person and you've got no money? So don't be greedy on stock. If you've got product and tech solved and you need someone to help you on growth, don't go cheap and get someone who's not very good. Get someone who's good and give them enough. You can't give them.
Don't be greedy ever.
And some people are. They worry too much about dilution. Is important. Like you don't want to dilute too much as you go through rounds for founders. But the critical things like hiring really good people is where you shouldn't be greedy, and you should make sure you focus. Generally speaking, the best product wins.
Yeah.
At its heart, these companies, all great companies, are product companies.
Yeah. Thanks so much for your time.
Cheers, Dan. Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.